And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam, and it's good to be back. I'm done with my finals. I graduated from the University of Michigan, so I am now not just a Wolverine fan. You can be that whether you graduate from Michigan or not, but I'm now a Michigan Wolverine through and through, both in terms of the fandom and also in terms of the fact that I now have a Bachelor's of Arts in economics. That's probably the last you will hear of my degree or my education on this show, though, because this is a college football with show, not just a University of Michigan or Michigan football show. We're going to be talking about Michigan today, speaking of which, but we're mostly going to be focusing on who I think the top offenses will be in college football. We're going to start a new rhythm here throughout the month of May, talking about breakout players for some of my top teams in the sport, for both their offenses and defenses. We did this with Indiana about a week and a half ago on defense. We may revisit it to make sure that this series covers all those teams on both sides of the football every week, but we're going to be visiting the top teams, which I've made pretty clear, Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Georgia, Notre Dame, Texas Tech, Miami. We'll even touch on some other teams and programs that are interesting to me. So stay tuned for that. And we're going to try to get more into recruiting than we have before on the show. So we'll discuss some USC and UCLA recruiting. It's hard to project and plan out the recruiting classes we'll discuss, but as news comes in, if there's a big time commit, or say a recruit is retained or fends off an offer from another school, that will be stuff that we are reporting on too. And Matt Rhule, we're going to talk about Matt Rhule's report card for year 4 as well. And I like to go into these report cards a little bit blind, where I have all the information I want, I have all the graphics I want, but I don't necessarily want to give a grade, a predetermined one, before I go on the show, because I want things to, A, be authentic, but B, I want you guys to understand my thought process and watch me think through how I'm grading these coaches in real time. It is a tough job to be a college football coach, let alone in a blue blood like the University of Nebraska. Make sure to be active in the live chat. Make sure to subscribe to the show. Make sure to hit that notification bell. And again, be active in the chat. Watch it all the way through. That's how you get the most context. That's how you provide me with new content ideas, is commenting things in the chat, even if I don't see them initially. If I just reread back through them, you guys might inspire me. And Super Chats and Patreon support's always appreciated, because that helps me produce more content on here, and that helps me do this full time. But without further ado, the best offenses in college football. Who are they? Who's going to be the more lethal offenses? Who are going to be the boa constricting offenses? Which ones are excited? Which ones are exciting rather to watch? And which ones are going to put you asleep? So I have 10 offenses here that I want to talk about. These 10 offenses will be lethal in a variety of different ways. Some will lull you to sleep with 40 minutes of possession in big games. Others will strike quickly. Others will be multiple, and there are some familiar faces from last year, but there are also some new faces, I would say. And Georgia is the first face that we're going to discuss here, and some would say they're a new face to being a top offense in the sport, but I wouldn't say so. I think that Georgia's offense last year was the stronger side of the football. And I wouldn't say I think this. I'd correct myself and say I know that they were the stronger side of the football. Watch the 2 Ole Miss games. Georgia in the second round couldn't stop Chambliss on defense, but Chambliss was also special. And even when the offense really struggled and Golding was able to reinvigorate an Ole Miss defense that wasn't really good all season long, got them to play their best ball in the playoffs, Georgia was still able to move the football and consistently enter the red zone, and they scored well over 30 points, and in the high 20s when you factor out the defensive score, which in post-2023 clock rules is pretty good for a playoff game, they were 4th in red zone touchdown percentage and top 25, top 15 in a variety of other metrics. It was a good offense that had some limitations, but you had Georgia's best wide receiver room since 23 or 22. You had an improved rushing attack that was really good in short yardage, power rushing situations. Gunnar Stockton was amongst one of the best quarterbacks in college football last year. He's probably on pace to be Kirby Smart's best overall quarterback in college. He's better than Stetson Bennett already. He is going to finish better than Jake Fromm if his level of development and progression continues. This is one of the top offenses in the sport, and what I'm excited to see is Caden Prothro in that tight end or wide receiver room. They bring back some other tight ends in that group, and then Juan Gaston, Drew Bobo, Ernest Green, they return a lot on that offensive line that was a strength for them last year, and seeing Gunnar Stockton in year 2 as a starting quarterback. There's a lot to like and a lot to love about this Georgia offense. Indiana is a very familiar face, and a face that was the best offense in college football last year. I know they didn't have the points per play that Notre Dame did quite, but as I've said before on Twitter and gotten into an argument with people, Notre Dame played a strength of schedule outside of the 40s, and that is a team who under Marcus Freeman has covered the spread frequently and done a really good job beating the small teams when they're not asleep playing them like NIU or Marshall, because they have a ridiculous ground game with those running backs, and they are able to break off big plays. They're able to create special teams plays. They love getting turnovers. That's the bread and butter of their defense under Freeman, and that results in pick sixes and quick scores that can inflate some of those offensive metrics and power ratings. Indiana did a lot of that too, but they faced a lot of top-end defenses. So against Ohio State, I know they only scored 13 points, but on a different day, maybe they score over 20, or they did miss a field goal in that game, and they were able to, in key moments, move that defense and create some game-changing plays against a generational unit. They were able to score 30 or more points against Dan Lanning's best defense at Oregon through his 4 years there. Alabama had a top 10 defense. Didn't matter. They physically pounded them. Miami's defense was able to give them some issues, much like Ohio State's, but they were still able to score 20 offensive points, and on a different day, maybe they score more. They were top 10 in touchdowns per game, averaging nearly 5. They were 12th in red zone touchdown percentage. They were first in third down conversion percentage, averaging over 55% of their third down opportunities resulting in conversions. They were top 10 in yards per pass, yards per point, punts per score. Their worst quality was pass blocking. And in run blocking, blocking from their receivers, in catching the ball, passing the ball, toughness, physicality, they aced all of those areas. This is an offense that I would expect takes a step back this year, as Mendoza was truly, the round 1, pick 1 quarterback in this cycle, and I think will have success in the NFL. He's very smart. He has the prototypical frame, great arm, but there is a chance they're more talented at running back, receiver, and O-line than they were last year. I still expect this offense to be top 10, if not top 5. We have Miami here, and Miami last season was an interesting case of ball knowledge, where you could easily get deceived into thinking that this offense was putrid. And there was a moment in October where I think there was some truth to that. Only scoring 20 points in SMU, making Louisville's defense look like a championship caliber unit. That's Timmy from South Park. Carson Beck has two forms. He has two faces. He has the face of, I looked completely stoned and I'm going to kill your defense with efficiency. And then there is Timmy from South Park, who loses you the game. He was the annoying, like almost typical of a Kirby Smart quarterback, weasel in September and the college football playoff, who was just playing at a very high level. And when I say weasel, I mean that in a compliment. A weasel is a quarterback who you underestimate due to their flaws or perceived flaws, and they're actually really good, and they constantly bite you in the rear. So his runs against Ohio State, some of the big passing plays against Indiana, his plays against Ole Miss, and what he did against Notre Dame, and the fact he never got credit for playing that well, that is what I would call a weasel quarterback. Stetson Bennett was a lot like this. J.J. McCarthy was a lot like this. Will Howard was at times like this, where they didn't get credit when they were good, and it was more so them than even their supporting cast with what they were doing. I think Darian Mensah has a higher ceiling than Beck, but I don't think that he is as surefire of an upgrade as some think. I'm on the side that he will be an upgrade, but Beck was a pretty good quarterback last year. There was a reason he was drafted in the 3rd round, higher than a lot of other good quarterbacks that have come before him. And they lose a lot in the offensive line. And I wonder, averaging 4.5 yards per carry last year in a really good power rushing game, but they didn't produce many explosives until the postseason. It reminded me a lot of 2023 Michigan's rushing attack, actually. Does the step back on the offensive line and some of the changing at the guard with receiver and quarterback, does that result in a better offense, which it very well can, or is there a step back? I think that Miami is one of the wild cards of the 2026 season, but I will say their offense will certainly be top 10. Michigan is on this list. They were putrid in big games last year, but they were quietly efficient in multiple different metrics. It was Michigan's defense, I would argue, that was the more disappointing side of the football last year. They were older. They, I think, had more talent on that side of the ball from a preseason angle. They finished outside the top 30 in almost all metrics, and Michigan's offense last year was above average, despite having inferior talent to the defense. What I would say with Michigan here is that when you look at what Jason Beck and Kyle Whittingham's staff did at Utah last year, you're going to see a lot of that with Michigan this year. Remember, Beck was in his first year as the offensive coordinator at Utah last year. Now, they had a lot of staff continuity in other places, but that staff is also almost entirely following Whittingham, especially the offensive staff from Utah to Michigan. Utah last year was 1st in red zone touchdown percentage, 3rd in touchdowns per game, 4th in 3rd down conversion percentage, 6th in points per play, 9th in yards per point, and 4th in yards per rush. Now, I do understand. I completely understand the notion and the argument that really in their big games they didn't perform all that well, and that matters in the Big Ten, and that when they did score a whole lot of points, well, it was against oftentimes inferior competition. But what I will say is that Michigan is going to be top 15 or top 10 in team talent composite this year, and Utah was in the top 30. So the supporting cast is going to be a major upgrade for the staff. The staff will have much more talent to work with. The schedule is also going to be much tougher. So I think those things will balance themselves out. And Michigan's offense, I would say right now, is going to be a strength and is going to be a pretty good unit, particularly at running the football. It's going to be key for them to keep Underwood healthy. They ran Devin Dampier a lot last year at Utah. If they can run Underwood a lot with those running backs and what that offensive line could be and their receivers, you could be looking at an offense that is frustrating for any defense to stop. For Ole Miss, I have questions about their team, but when you return Trinidad Chambliss and Kawan Lacey at quarterback and running back, it's pretty simple. That's going to be a offense with a very high floor. They maintained some of the staffers from the Kiffin era, so they lost they lost some of their staff to LSU. I'm forgetting the offensive coordinator who they lost, and I know that Kiffin was the guy who developed this scheme. He was the game planner. He's an offensive guy. They lost Charlie Weiss Jr. and Joe Cox. I was confused on who was the actual OC, but it was actually both of them that left Ole Miss for LSU. What Ole Miss did is they brought back John David Baker, who's previously the tight ends coach, passing game coordinator, and co-OC for Ole Miss from 2021 to 2023. Previously, the OC at East Carolina from 24 to 25. So they have some familiarity within the scheme. Brian Brown, who has been the DB coach and co-DC for Ole Miss for 2 years, is now going to enter his third year at Ole Miss, but first year as the DC. So there's some staff continuity there. You have some roster continuity. I think that the rushing attack and the passing attack will be pretty damn good. What's going to determine the ceiling of this unit is how do they replace some of the outgoing production at receiver, tight end, and what do they do on the offensive line. But outside of that, this offense and what they did to Georgia, when I think Georgia had a relatively decent game plan in that second meeting between the two in 2025, and what they were able to do against Miami, that's impressive. And a lot of that had to do with Chambliss and Lacey, who are both back. We have Notre Dame as one of the top offenses and one of the more lethal units. I do expect this offense from a statistics standpoint to probably take a bit of a step back, because when you have 2 first-round running backs and they're able to pop off 50-yard run after 50-yard run, and you pair that with CJ Carr and some of the receiver talent they had against that schedule, you will get a unit that, was in pure statistics, not adjusting for strength of schedule, not looking at strength of schedule adjusted efficiency, this was the number 1 offense last year. They were first in points per play, scoring a whopping 0.664 points per play. They were second in punts per score, first in yards per point, second in yards per pass, and third in yards per carry. They were incredibly impressive. Without those 2 backs, some losses on the O-line, some losses at receiver, I can't imagine they're statistically going to get better than that. They do, however, return CJ Carr. They're more talented at receiver on paper than they were last year, and they're also more talented on the offensive line than they were last year. You pair that with what should be a much better defense, and you're looking at a Notre Dame team that should be better this year than they were last year. And the offense, especially with CJ Carr, who's a future NFL quarterback, and Aeneas Williams and others in that running back room should at least be competent. I trust Joe Rudolph on the offensive line, and if just one of Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter pop, and Greathouse is healthy with Faison, you're looking at a lethal offense that will be a part of a college football playoff team and potentially a national champion. Ohio State has to be up here. They're always going to be up here with Ryan Day, especially with how much they bring back. Last year, this offense was quietly Ryan Day's worst of his career. Now, I understand they were second and third down conversion percentage. They were 7th in punts per score. They were 9th in yards per pass attempt, and they didn't turn over the football much. But they were outside the top 15 in points per play, yards per point, yards per rush, QB sacked percentage, red zone touchdown percentage, and touchdowns per game. This was an offense that, when you look at how they did against the FPI top 15, so Texas, Indiana, and Miami, they scored a whopping 12.6 points per game. That's the worst of any Ryan Day offense in big games of his career against the top 15 of FPI. I mean, that was a unit where you pair it with the defense they had. They were fundamentally sound for the most part, outside of maybe the rushing game, and they had a very workable schedule as Penn State majorly disappointed, Michigan disappointed, Texas did, and you get a team that had a generational defense with probably just a good offense, and that was 2025 Ohio State. 2026 Ohio State, with Arthur Smith calling the plays, with much of the offensive line coming back, with wide receiver 1, QB 1, and running back 1 returning, it has to be better. I imagine that there will be parts like their third down conversion percentage or punts per score or yards per pass or turnovers per game that'll probably be worse because the schedule will be much tougher. But when you look at how they perform in the big games, their play calling, their execution up front, Julian saying maturing from a year 1 starter to a year 2 starter, this offense is going to be much better. Last year, I would argue with someone that this offense probably was not top 10. I would argue with that. It was a very high floor, but low ceiling unit due to some of the limitations it had due to the youth at running back, quarterback, and a lot of the issues on the offensive line. But I would argue this year they're for sure going to have a top 10, if not top 5 unit. And you will see the difference early on. You'll see it, I think, against Texas in week 2, where they're not going to be able to win if they only score 14 points. It's going to be a different Ohio State team. It's still going to be a top 5 team and a national title contender. That offense with Bo Jackson, with Jeremiah Smith, with Julian Sayin, and with Arthur Smith calling the plays is going to be the reason why. For Oregon, now we're getting to, I love talking about Oregon. People have probably noticed this. Their offense, when you look at the numbers last year, top 10 in points per play, top 10 in punts per score, they were 8th in yards per carry. They had a rushing attack that reminded me a lot of Notre Dame's. You get a lot of big rushes, you block well downfield. Sometimes you give up those TFLs just due to the nature of your scheme. It was like a Walmart version of Notre Dame's rushing attack. Notre Dame and Indiana had the best rushing attacks last year. Oregon was close. They do lose a ton on the offensive line. But Oregon is one of these teams with their O-line coach, Alik Terry, with how they've recruited, where I give them benefit of the doubt there. And I do expect them to have a top 10, if not top 5 O-line this year. You look at Dante Moore coming back, he could be round 1, pick 1. It's him or Arch Manning. I'd lean Manning for the NFL, but I'd lean Moore right now to be the better college QB. Their rushing attack should be amazing. They have the deepest receiver room in college football, especially when you factor in the tight end position. Early mock drafts have this team or Texas getting 4 to 5 first-round picks. And a lot of that for Oregon's on defense. But you got to think Dante Moore, Jamari Johnson, maybe someone off their offensive line, maybe someone from their receiver room could contend for that as well. They did a good job running the football, passing the football. They did a good job getting touchdowns. They did a great job creating big plays. If they just cut down on some of the turnovers, do a bit of a better job protecting Dante Moore, and I think they have better tackle play this year than they did last year, and they're more efficient in the red zone, this could be the best offense in college football. Texas is up next. I understand that this Texas offense was basically Iowa's offense for the first 2 months, but in November it started clicking. And they didn't turn over the football much. Arch Manning grew tremendously as a quarterback. They did play a tough schedule last year. And those games against Oklahoma, Texas A&M, I know the bowl game doesn't count too much, but even Michigan, the way they were able to move the ball somewhat against Georgia, I think is the mark of a team that was improving as the year went on. They were not a top 10 team last year. They majorly disappointed. But this year, bringing in Raleek Brown, Hollywood Smothers, Cam Coleman, Melvin Sayini, bringing back Trevor Gooseby, Arch Manning, Ryan Wingo, this offense is going to be better. It disappointed last year. There's nothing about only statistics and looking at only statistics that would tell you this is going to be a top 10 offense. But if you watch the games, if you look at the returning production, you look at what's coming in, this will be a top 10 offense in 2026. I'm curious to see with Steve Sarkisian's outside zone scheme and how Texas in 2024 and 2025 just wasn't really a good team at running the football. They were very ineffective with that scheme in rushing, especially in the big games. I'm curious to see with this makeover on the offensive line at running back and having a mobile QB in Arch Manning who will be healthier this year than he was last year and more experienced with better receivers. I'm curious how that all works. This could be the best big play offense in college football. And last but not least, we got the USC Trojans here. They had a top 10 offense last year at home, on the road. Yeah, they need to improve on that. But I strongly believe that's much more of a Lincoln Riley thing than a USC roster thing. And they return the most starters in college football overall. On offense, the question for them is how well do they replace Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane. I like the addition of Terrell Anderson. Tanu Kynes comes in. I do trust them at receiver. And they return so much production on the O-line, quarterback, and running back to where their rushing offense, which was top 20 in yards per rush, should probably be top 10 or top 15 this year. I expect Mark Bowman to be a better tight end than anyone USC had last year or will have outside of him this year, so they'll upgrade at tight end. I love what I see out of this USC team overall, and it's not just some of the defensive improvements that I expect that cause me to really like this team. It's the offense, too. This offense last year showed a level of physicality I don't think they had in 24 or 23 or 22. They were able to produce numbers that the Caleb Williams offenses were able to without having nearly the quarterback that they did those years or the finesse at that position. And that marks an increase in physicality, where they were able to win a road game against Nebraska. They were able to, I know it's Purdue, but they didn't win a road game the year prior. They're slowly but surely improving. And I do expect this offense to be a unit that gives any defense, Ohio State's, Oregon's, Indiana's, at least a handful of fits, where last year they didn't really give those caliber of defenses many fits at all. I know they scored 27 on Oregon, 24 against Notre Dame, but I think those defenses won't be at the level of the Oregon or Indiana or Ohio State defenses of this year, especially the Oregon and Indiana ones. Those are my most lethal offenses entering college football's 2026 season. Oklahoma State, they missed by a little bit. There are other teams that could contend for this, like LSU, for example. Let me know which offenses I missed. Tell me why I'm wrong about that and who I should have left off. Curious to get your thoughts. Now we're going to move to breakout players, and this is one of my more favorite segments to do. I loved talking about Indiana's defense, and maybe we will revisit that. Maybe, just maybe. But what do you think about the top offenses? Okay, reading the comments here, I do love the spiderweb outlay too. It gives a good perspective. We actually did copy that from Game on Paper. That is a website that I started using last year. It's a website I have fallen in love with. We stole the spider chart idea from them. Sometimes we integrate their metrics in those charts. We took the concept and really just applied it with a lot of teamrankings.com ratings, since they already produce their own spider charts. Doesn't look like there's any content ideas for me to jot down. I do have my notepad in case of that. But let's move on and talk about some breakout players on Indiana's offense. We already discussed breakout players on Indiana's defense, but now let's look on the offensive side of the football, where out of Indiana's record-setting 8 players selected in the 2026 NFL Draft, Indiana had 6 of those players selected from their offensive side of the football, including round 1, pick 1, Fernando Mendoza. So who steps up on this unit? I want to take a look at Josh Hoover first, who transferred in. And breakout players are mostly reserved for newcomers, not veterans. But I want to discuss Hoover here because of Cignetti and Shanahan's reputation at the quarterback position. So Hoover had a 76.8 PFF grade last year. 29 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. He completed about every 2 of his 3 pass attempts, 65.9%, and threw for over 3,000 passing yards. Cignetti has always had, whether at JMU, IUP, Indiana, top-end quarterbacks in the conference. So why I'm listing Hoover here as a breakout player, despite being a vet, is I don't think people are going to readily understand the step forward that he will take. It's a bit of a different situation than Rourke or Mendoza, where Hoover, on paper, is more familiar with the RPO scheme that Indiana runs than those two were, and he's also more turnover heavy. So you get some additional benefits bringing him in and some added costs that the other two didn't have. He'll be a different quarterback than those two, and I would expect him to be worse than Mendoza, but better than Curtis Rourke. And Curtis Rourke was a pretty damn good quarterback, considering that both of his ACLs were torn when he was playing for the Hoosiers in 2024. Hoover will cut down on some of the interceptions. He'll be better protected. He'll have a much better defense and ground attack, and I imagine he surpasses 30 passing touchdowns. He is going to be a top 10 quarterback this year. There's a chance that he will also be in that top 5 conversation, whereas last year he was kind of in that top 25, top 20 range. He's just going to have better coaching and a much better supporting cast than he did at TCU. Lee Beebe Jr., who was injured in the Indiana State game last year, only had 209 rushing yards, 7.7 yards per carry, though. It'll be him or Turbo Richard who will be starting for Indiana at running back, and just the athleticism that Beebe has is incredible. He has that burst, he has that physicality, he has the proven production, and I love Indiana's running back room this year. He's also another example of he, went to UAB, did well there. He was an unranked recruit. Cignetti identified him, brought him in, and I expect with a few years in Indiana's system and development that he'll be one of the better Big Ten running backs this season. I also expect that to be the case with Turbo Richard. Turbo Richard transferred in from Boston College, had a 72.5 PFF grade, 5.2 yards per carry. Keep in mind that Boston College was a 2-10 football team, and they didn't really have any bright spots outside of Turbo Richard. He was one of their few good players. 9 touchdowns, 749 rushing yards. Spring games don't matter. I did see some burst at the Indiana spring game, which I attended, though, and that backs up my preseason research, which said, Turbo Richard with Lee Beebe and with Kobe Martin make up one of the deepest running back rooms in the country. Richard and Beebe will be the best backs, but all of them have burst, including Kobe Martin, who averaged 6.5 yards per carry, mostly in mock-up duty, with 6 rushing touchdowns. He was a redshirt freshman last year, now entering his second year with major playing time. I would expect him to take a decent step forward, get more reps in competitive game situations if they feel like, they need him to be there. He's from Fishers, Indiana, 6 foot, over 200 pounds, 78 carries last year, almost a 90 PFF grade. But you got to keep in mind, he was clearly running back number 3 behind Roman Hemby and behind Kalon Black, who got picked in the 3rd round. I'm not worried at all about Indiana's running back room. Unlike quarterback, where I do expect Hoover to be worse than Mendoza, but still be a top 10 or top 5 QB, Indiana on paper is going to be as good as they were at running back, and there is a chance they'll actually be better than they were last year. Tyler Morris at wide receiver, if he can stay healthy, is a breakout player for the Hoosiers. I like what I see out of him in terms of his upside. His biggest question is his health. He got hurt in 2025 spring camp and was never heard from or seen from again. He was out for the season, and he got a little bit dinged up in the spring game. With Michigan in 2024, he just never had a good system, didn't have good coaching or good QB play. In 2023, he was wide receiver 3, but as a fairly young player. So Indiana needs... They need 3 or 4 good wide receivers, especially with what's happening at tight end. Tight end is definitely taking a step back. That is the unit that is going to regress the most from 25 to 26 for Indiana. So you have Becker and you have Marsh, who are so well known already that I couldn't put them on here as breakout players. Morris, Chandler, Bond, and Preston are your other 4, and ideally you need 2 of them to step up. Preston's proven enough where I didn't put him on this list, and I also, don't know, what his upside is, how well he's going to do. So he could be a breakout player, but I didn't put him on here. I put Morris on here because he hasn't had a lot of production, and if he does stay healthy and he's able to play towards his ceiling this year, and Mike Shanahan's track record as the wide receivers coach would indicate that with his development, Morris would be a pretty good wide receiver, then he can put up some serious numbers and be an effective wide receiver 3. Davion Chandler, Last year had one reception for 65 yards and a touchdown against Purdue. He's a player that Indiana insiders and people close to me who are Indiana fans or connected with the program keep mentioning. They keep talking about him. So as a true freshman last year, played enough reps to be a sophomore and burn his red shirt, I am expecting him to have a more integral part of the offense, to be a more integral part of the offense this year. Chandler is a, smaller, quicker receiver, and I think can be a good wide receiver anywhere from probably 3 to 5 option. Marsh and Becker are obviously the top tier talent in that room. There is a chance they're both first rounders. I view Becker as a top 5 receiver, and I would imagine after I do some research, I might come to the same conclusion that someone else on Twitter did, where they're like, I would take him over everyone else but Cam Coleman and Jeremiah Smith. I might arrive at that point. I'm not going to lie, but we'll see. He's certainly top 5 for me, though. He's in that conversation with Malachi Toney, DeCorian Moore, Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman. Those are my top 5 receivers right now. Top 10, I would probably slot Nick Marsh somewhere in there, if not top 15 overall. So they have the upside, but they need Chandler, Morris, Preston, or Bond. They need 2 or 3 of them to step up and play like experienced players in order to account for Omar Cooper Jr. leaving, Elijah Surratt, E.J. Williams leaving, and also accounting for Riley Nowakowski departing at the tight end position. Joe Brunner is an offensive lineman coming in from Wisconsin who I love. Could be their best offensive lineman this year. Brunner, with over 1,541 career snaps, has not allowed a sack in his last 2 seasons playing with the Badgers. A Badgers offensive line that has not been good, a Badgers offense that has had no identity, and he has been one of the best, if not arguably the best player on that unit. Now he is following Bob Bostad, who coached him and recruited him at Wisconsin, to Indiana. I love the fit. And I love it because he fits what Indiana's offensive line is. When you look at Indiana's O-line last year, pass blocking, they could improve on that a lot, and that's going to be a big question for them this year. There is never a doubt in watching that team that they would not slowly wear you down in run blocking. Even against Miami, even against Ohio State, when those defenses were practically playing perfect and the game went exactly how those defenses wanted it to go, they were able to break off enough runs, get enough contact, block downfield enough to keep that RPO system going and get enough big plays through the air off that and have a multiple attack to win those games and go 16-0. He fits that. He's great as a pass blocker. It's why he's allowed 0 sacks, only allowed 7 pressures, but he's even better as a run blocker. And he's going to have a better O-line coach, a far superior scheme, and a far superior quarterback and receivers to work with. It's the same thing with Hoover. Great player, and everything around him is going to be superior. He's on my watch list for being maybe the best interior offensive lineman in the country. I'm lower on Indiana's tackles than a lot of people are. I'm probably much higher on their interior offensive line than most people are, as almost a way to balance that out. So pay attention to Brunner. Him with Lynch and Evans in that interior, and Smith and Adamola on the outside. If they all can take a bit of a step forward in pass blocking and continue to be one of the more physical units in football, then they won't need Hoover to be Mendoza to win the title again. And Ademola Ajani, on the other side of Carter Smith, I would expect him, after seeing limited action and starts towards the end of last year, now with a full season with first-team reps and a full season of playing time, I would expect him to improve. He was pretty shaky last year. Khalil Benson was their tackle 1 for most of the year. Then he got hurt and dinged up a bit, and they slid Ajani, who was originally a guard, into that right tackle spot. He wasn't really good last year, but he showed some flashes. And I think that with another year in the system, in the staff, and having an elite defense again to work against in practice, he's going to be so much better. He has the tools to be a great college tackle and one day get drafted. So I like what I see out of him. And with Indiana and that offense, if these players and a few others can take a step forward, as I mentioned earlier, they will not need Mendoza level play at the QB position to once again be a tremendous offense or even to win it all. This is a unit that you're going to see a step back at tight end, so you need a step forward at receiver and probably offensive line in downfield blocking, also in pass blocking, because Nowakowski, they used him a lot to chip block on the left or right side to help Smith or Ajani out in protection, and he was pretty damn good at that. Hoover is not going to be quite as mobile or probably durable as Mendoza was. Just does not have the same size, he's not the same quarterback. He doesn't have the same prototypical NFL traits. But if the offensive line, running back room, and receiver room stay the same, and especially if they improve with the expected improvement we're expecting on defense and maybe even special teams, this is a different type of Indiana team that can still win at the same level, just in a different way. And I want to use that to talk about what I think this offense is going to look like in 2026. I would expect the QB sacked percentage, for example, which was 81st in America last year, I would expect that to be more about, I think, 4 or 5%. And that is with a tougher schedule, that is with a quarterback who won't be quite as mobile. It's not going to be elite. I don't think the pass blocking will be elite. I don't even know if it can be, but it's going to be better. The scheme helps, and when you return 2 starting tackles from the end of last year with the same coaching staff, the same coach, I have a hard time imagining they won't be better there. Very hard time imagining that. And you lose Coogan at center, but you bring in Brunner, so I think the interior will be the same, if not better. And they averaged 5.7 yards per carry with a very multiple scheme. They could run on the outside against you. They could run up the middle. They were great in all types of runs situationally, and they always got yards after contact. I do not expect that to be different. I would project this team to have more turnovers per game due to the nature of Hoover, so that's going to regress. I would also expect the third down conversion percentage with the changes at receiver and quarterback to likely take a step back. It's hard to be first in that category back-to-back seasons, but I would expect the yards per carry to improve, the pass blocking to improve, and I don't know if you will see, I would probably say you won't see the games that offense had against Alabama or Oregon where they were just, perfect on every throw. But I also don't think that you will see a unit that is held to, only 13 points by Ohio State or gets that blown up by Miami. So the floor will be raised. I think that the ceiling will be a little bit capped. It'll be more of a, I think, kind of game control like offense statistically. I don't know enough to tell you how they're going to change things up schematically and how that's going to work, but analytically, I would project this team to be better at running the ball, a little bit worse at passing the ball, despite having better pass blocking. The ceiling just won't be as high because Mendoza was putting on Joe Burrow-like performances in the playoff, and I just don't know how well that can be replicated. A little bit lower of a ceiling, probably a decently higher floor. I do love this team in offense entering 2026. I've found myself surprisingly higher on them than most again. There were a lot of people who in the winter had this team like number 1 or number 2 or number 3, and as the seasons dragged on, we're never in the offseason here in college football. It's always the preseason, regular season, or postseason. As the preseasons dragged on, people are selling stock in them, and I do think that that is a mistake. Keep in mind, with the 72nd most talented roster, they were able to produce a defense, special teams, and offense that were so good, it was impossible for those units to be flukes. It's not like they got a bunch of lucky big plays or a pick six every game or they were winning all these close games. Keep in mind, Oregon twice, Alabama once, those were double-digit wins. And Iowa, Penn State, yeah, they were close games on the road, but they were on the road against top 15 power-rated teams. Their two other close games, Miami and Ohio State, finished top 5 and had some of the most lethal front sixes, front sevens in all of college football. So I'm not counting on this team to be like significantly worse. I'm counting on them to likely take a step back, especially on the offensive side of the football. I am. But they're going to have a lot of new faces. They're going to have a lot of great faces. And many of these players they brought in will play at a higher level than they did last year due to having superior coaching, development, and a better supporting cast. This team was the most efficient team in all of college football by a mile. And that wasn't just on the defensive side of the football. That was on the offensive side of the football. And they bring back their position coaches, their coordinators, and they bring in a strength and conditioning coach who Cignetti, the guy who's 27-2 at Indiana, trusts. So I'm excited to watch this offense and see all the differences from last year, and I expect it to be one of the more lethal units in all of college football. For Texas's offense, talking about some breakout players there, it is a bit of a different story, but I would also, if I were a Texas fan, expect this unit to be one of the more lethal ones in college football. Why? Well, it's not just about the players they have. It's about the guy with the headset and with the play sheet. Coaches that call plays do not win national championships. It's very rare. The last coach to do that was Jimbo Fisher in 2013. But Ryan Day has been close many times. He was close in 2022, and he was, closer than probably most people will admit in 23 and 25. And 24, he didn't call the plays, but he was very heavily involved in the offensive game planning and preparation. You saw a lot more of his concepts and his methods in the postseason than you did in the regular season. We did get a super chat here from Nate DeGreat, a $50 one, which is just insane. Thank you for that. I will get to that after the breakout players for Texas's offense, just so I don't interrupt the flow that I was on. This should be Steve Sarkisian's best offense, but should does not equal will, and they will need players to perform better than they did at prior stops or better than they did at Texas in 2025 for the Longhorns to field this hypothetically elite offense. Let's take a look at the first breakout player on my list, Rhule Brown at running back. When Arizona State is as banged up as they were, and they are playing a tougher than average Big 12 schedule, had to play Mississippi State on the road, had to play Texas Tech, they had to play Utah, they had to play a lot of good teams. They were well coached, I understand that. But when Sam Leavitt is inconsistent for the whole year and eventually is out, and you have health issues and you face that schedule, and you run for over 6 yards per carry and 1,141 rushing yards, sign me up. Indiana and many other top programs wanted him. So Texas got a steal here. Hollywood Smothers is another candidate who I, in theory, could put on this list, but Hollywood Smothers committed to Alabama, and people are talking about him more than they are Rhule Brown. And there's a chance Rhule Brown's the best back in the room. Against Texas Tech, he averaged 3.6 yards per carry with a touchdown, and he had 84 total yards. Now, those aren't eye-popping numbers, but Texas Tech's defense last year, just turn on the Orange Bowl, where they basically had an Iowa-level offense, and Oregon's offense was helpless against that Texas Tech defense. It was a preview of what Indiana was about to do to Oregon, because Indiana actually had a top-end elite offense, and Texas Tech was pretty bad, and they had a more fundamentally sound defense. Tech, they were able to do defensively against Oregon, was at a level that no other defense would have been able to perform at against that Ducks offense, given what Oregon had personnel-wise. And for Brown to be a part of that win, and a pretty major part of it, scoring 6 points of the 48 points in that game total between both teams, that's pretty impressive. He also had, a good game against Mississippi State, a good game against Colorado, good game against Iowa State, a good game against TCU where he averaged over 6.4 yards per carry and had 184 total yards. He's going to have an improved supporting cast. He'll have an improved offensive line, a superior play caller, and he will not be the bell cow. So he's going to be a fresher player. Up next, we got Cam Coleman. Now, I understand that Cam Coleman is already well known. So how can he be viewed as the consensus number 2 wide receiver and be a breakout player here? Isn't that stupid? Isn't that redundant, Sam? Are you just trying to make sure that you can get to 20 minutes? No. Let me explain why. Cam Coleman is the number 1 possession catch receiver in all of college football. Number 1. Cam Coleman had 708 receiving yards with Jackson Arnold at quarterback and 5 touchdowns. Like, he's insane. He has put up NFL numbers with Peyton Thorne and Jackson Arnold at quarterback, and Hugh Freeze having like 5 offensive coordinators. You don't understand how good he is. No one does. And the reason no one does is while Jeremiah Smith is the number 1 receiver in college football, Cam Coleman is much closer to him than the average person is willing to admit. There's all these comparisons about, Malik Neighbors and Jeremiah Smith, or, Malachi Toney and Jeremiah Smith. That's insane. Those people are on drugs. Cam Coleman versus Jeremiah Smith, or maybe like if Charlie Becker replicates what he did in the second half of Indiana's year across, those are the comparisons we should all be looking at here. I still think Smith is clearly wide receiver 1. As a prospect, he certainly is. But Coleman at 6'3", over 200 pounds, getting nearly to 1,000 yards with a team that missed a bowl game and had Jackson Arnold and Ashton Daniels at quarterback, and the previous year had Hank Brown starting, who couldn't complete a forward pass at Iowa, and Peyton Thorne starting over him, who I think it's proven he was kind of a Kenneth Walker, Jaden Reed, Keon Coleman merchant. You're looking at a receiver who is going to get over 1,000 yards at Texas and is going to be a headache for all defenses, and they'll have to double team him. They will have to play aggressive with him and risk pass interference. He is going to be a game changer for this Texas offense. Khalil Lockett is a younger receiver who I would expect to take steps forward. Only had 47 receiving yards last year, but was highly recruited out of high school, took a redshirt year, and he has the prototypical size and is going to have, a second year in the system, second year working with Arch Manning. And I know Emmett Mosley, Ryan Wingo, and Cam Coleman are your projected starting receivers right now, but their Wake Forest transfer and Khalil Lockett, I think, could make some noise as rotational guys who can still make impact plays. Nick Townsend at tight end, according to ourlads.com and according to Sports Illustrated Texas, is the projected starting tight end right now. Michael Masunas, who we'll talk about in a few seconds, is their projected, more so blocking tight end, but he can still be a receiving weapon as he was at Michigan State. Townsend at 6'3", 241 pounds. He has the goods. The question is, does he put his talent and goods to use? And I imagine if they're going to be starting him and using Masunas as more of an inline blocking tight end, that they trust him. And while I don't trust Steve Sarkisian as much as I do Curt Cignetti, Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, even Dan Lanning, he's a top 10 coach in the sport. He's one of the best offensive minds in the sport. So him and his coaches, they know what they're doing. And Masunas, an older player, 6'5", nearly 260 pounds, great blocking tight end, great receiving tight end too, at 232 receiving yards with a Michigan State team that practically quit halfway through the season. 3 touchdowns, a PFF grade at 76.8. You gotta love what they have in that tight end group. We talked about it just a few minutes ago with Indiana. Having a great blocking tight end can change everything. And Texas has that. They got Jack Endries in the portal last year, and, he was good, but he was a day 3 pick for a reason. I feel like this tight end group is better suited for what Texas wants to do and what they need to win national titles compared to what they had last year. And the only offensive lineman we'll talk about with Texas is Melvin Sayini. I'm hearing a lot about Trevor Goosby. And Trevor Goosby, for me, is tackle 1 right now. College tackle 1, NFL tackle 1. There's hype with Carter Smith. There's hype with Jordan Seaton. I like both of those players. I do not like them as much as I do Trevor Goosby. I don't hear a lot of people talking about Melvin Sayini, though. They had a Wake Forest transfer at receiver, but I think Sayini is the Wake Forest transfer we should all be paying attention to. He allowed 0 sacks last year, only 9 pressures. He had 1,577 career snaps. He's a redshirt junior, so Texas could bring him back in 2027. So you're not getting him for only a year, but you're getting him for maybe 2. He had an 80.8 pass blocking grade and a 73.1 PFF grade. And at 6'6", over 300 pounds, he has the appropriate length and he has the proven production. So he has the potential and the production. That's the best combination you could ask for. And what was Texas's biggest issue last year? It actually wasn't Arch Manning. It was the offensive line. And I think they did a good job retaining their good players and bringing in some new blood like Sayini that can help Arch Manning be more comfortable in this offense. Last year, the Longhorn offense was what it was, to be frank. They were outside the top 25 in pretty much all major metrics except for yards per point and turnovers per game. And yards per point is really predicated on turnovers per game, good special teams, which Texas did have last year, and good defense, which Texas also had last year. If I had a question for this Texas offense, it would be, can Manning completely eliminate the inconsistencies, or is he always going to have somewhat of a boomer bust nature? And because of Texas's scheme with, what they do, Sark loves the outside zone, basically developed his own offense, his own type of outside zone. With the pieces they brought in the O-line, are they going to be like the 2024 O-line, where they were full of NFL players, had great pass blockers, but run blocking was inconsistent? Are they going to be that type of O-line, and they're going to rely on those good backs to carry them in some spots? Or are they going to be a, new type of Texas line where you would think Sayini and Goosby are going to be the best tackle duo or one of the best tackle duos in the country, but can this team field an offense like the 2023 team where Texas was able to run all over you that year when they were healthy at running back? And now you would have a superior quarterback to Quinn Ewers, and you'd probably have a similar or superior wide receiver group to that unit. And a better defense, you would hope. I don't think this defense will be as good as the 2024 unit, but it should be more consistent and have a higher floor than that 2023 unit that was... It's a lot like Michigan State's defense in 2021. Much better in all areas, but excellent. And I mean excellent at stopping the run. Oh, man, that pass defense could sometimes be pretty putrid. So that's what I'm looking for with Texas's offense. I would expect their running backs, quarterback, receivers, and tackles to be among the best in America. It's the tight end play, the interior of the line, and Manning's consistency that would be my only questions. The defense last year had the talent. They just didn't have the depth at some parts. I don't quite totally understand still the change from Kwiatkowski to Muschamp, but I don't think I need to. Sark knows more about football than I do. I still think Muschamp is a great defensive coordinator. They will match up with some teams better and other teams worse due to the scheme change, but they have the players and goods there. And special teams was good. This offense, people will say, well, they were overrated last year or Arch Manning is trash. They did not watch November. I'm not saying he'll be the best quarterback in college football, I think Chambliss is definitely number one there. And Dante Moore, Julian Sayin, some other QBs could be better college QBs or better within the system they operate. Manning is, as far as I'm concerned, basically a lock for round one, pick one, unless Dante Moore takes a, crazy leap, and he was already very good last year. So it's all a question of how this comes together. They have the goods, and last year's team was pretty disappointing, but with what they did in the portal and what they brought back, Texas had one of the best preseasons of any team entering 2026. I certainly think this offense will be top 10, which will be a first since 2023. The question is, will it be Sark's best offense, and how consistent will it be, specifically at the quarterback position and up front in the run game? All right, let me get to this super chat. Let me get to that. So I'm going to need to pop out the chat, of course. And again, thank you. Thank you very much for that $50 super chat. That's insane. That is absolutely insane to get a $50 super chat. That's awesome. You know what? Nate DeGreat, what content do you want me to make? $50 is a lot of money. You can bribe me into making maybe a 10-minute segment. Thanks to that. So what content do you want to see from me? Let me know, and I'll write it down after I react to all of this. So Nate DeGreat sends in a $50 super chat. Thank you so much again. Let's say hypothetically Nebraska wins the national championship. What would the college football world think if Nebraska wins the national title? Remember, hypothetically, which is probably not going to happen, but let's just say they would. How would you react? Well, if Nebraska wins the national championship, like this year, or really any year under Matt Rhule, I would wonder, A, what took so long, because they've been above average at best the last 3 years and bad in segments of that time frame. And if it's not Matt Rhule, I would immediately view that coach, unless they obviously spent a lot of money to get top-end talent, I would view that in one of two ways. I would either view that as a fluke. So say the 2027 class is insane, and Trey Taylor is like Joe Burrow with like even better legs, and say that some of the other members of that class whose names escapes me, like they all pan out. Then maybe it's just like, okay, you recruited the best class of the year and they all panned out well, but that would also probably coincide with wonderful coaching and development. So it would be either, okay, this is a lightning in a bottle and it's never going to happen again, or Nebraska immediately has one of the best staffs in America, and the rest of college football should be put on notice. It's hard to win a national title at Nebraska. So this is a video I could make explaining why I think my nose is itching. Apologies for you all seeing that. Every college football blue blood should expect to win one title in like every 10 years. And I think that there's one exception to that, maybe two. And they are both in the Great Plains. Nebraska's the definite exception. I think Oklahoma might be the other one. And that's just due to their locations and the fact that, especially with Nebraska, there's no natural recruiting pipeline around them. So you have to have like very much superior coaching to compensate for that, and superior development. So hopefully that answered your question. I would be shocked. I'd be more shocked than I was about Indiana last year, because I was pretty high on Indiana in the preseason. And at the end of the day, I'm shocked that Cignetti in Indiana happened. I'm not shocked they won it all last year, like within that context and watching everything develop. I thought after that Illinois game, the team would have a shot at winning it all. With Nebraska, I mean, I would love to see them win a title, but I would be surprised, honestly. I think that if they're going to win, and if they're going to win at that level, with Matt Rhule. I think what they're going to have to do is perform well this year, win all the games they should, which means 7 or 8 wins. And they're going to have to, make sure that 2027 class is well developed. They can keep them together. They pan out. And maybe they could, put a lot of their funds towards cycling up 1 year and competing for that title. Nice to see you, Parker Mose, entering the chat. Legendary Romeo says, I think Arch will always be a feast or famine type of guy. Mediocre most of the time. Flash is being really good. Thinks he won't be an NFL starter. That is an interesting comment. And I do want to watch some film on quarterbacks before officially, talking about who I think the best quarterback is outside of Chambliss. But that is interesting. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Nate the Great, for the $50 super chat. I really do appreciate that. Good stuff. Good stuff in the comments, guys. Great stuff there. But it's time to discuss some other things. We're going to start a new series. It'll go Monday and Friday. Today we're just doing it Tuesday because I didn't do a show yesterday. But Monday and Friday, we are going to have buying or selling and discussing different conferences, teams, or players, all these different things across the sport of college football that I am buying or that I am selling entering 2026. I'm buying the Big Ten's future as the top conference in the sport. That doesn't mean I believe the SEC, Big 12, or ACC will never, ever win a national title. But I think moving forward under the current rules, which I expect will be in place for at least a few more years, if not longer, the Big Ten is going to dominate the sport. You're already seeing it where their lower level programs are more interested in football than they were before. And many of your top end programs, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, USC, Indiana has joined that pack, Penn State and Nebraska are trying to rejoin that pack. They're taking football more seriously than they were on average, say, 10 years ago. The Big Ten's future is bright because under the current system, collectively they can outspend any conference. And they have other incentives like good college towns, good academics. More importantly, outside of the, money, they have a hell of a lot better coaching than any other conference, I would say. I'm a Michigan guy for context. So when I watched Michigan win it all in 2023, and in the background there was this, Michigan had the beat Ohio State drill, and then they started instituting the beat Georgia drill. I loved Georgia and really admired Kirby Smart because I thought that, Kirby Smart's Georgia and Jim Harbaugh's Michigan shared a lot of similarities. And that Jim Harbaugh's Michigan won the national title because they mimicked a lot of what Georgia did and learned from that 2021 Orange Bowl. Now, how I would put Georgia and Kirby Smart is they are mimicking the Big Ten with a lot of what they do, where they do not have the biggest budget in the SEC. I would say LSU, A&M, Texas spend more than they do, and there's a chance other schools do too. But Georgia's coaching is far better than any of those teams. They are in a tier of their own in the SEC, and along with Indiana and Ohio State in college football for having top-end head coaches, coordinators, and assistants all at the same time. Now I would put it, and this shows the paradigm shift in the Power Four, that Georgia is mimicking the top-end Big Ten teams. It's not the other way around like how I would have said that in 2022 or 2023, and maybe even parts of 2024. When you look at the national title odds as of yesterday per FanDuel, Ohio State's number 1 at plus 550. Indiana and Oregon are tied for 4th at plus 800. You got to go down before getting to the next Big Ten team, but for 3 of the top 5 places to be Big Ten, and they all play each other. So Oregon plays Ohio State, Indiana plays Ohio State plays both. Indiana plays Michigan and USC, so does Oregon. And USC, per FanDuel, as of yesterday, was 15th in national title odds. And I'm pretty sure that Michigan was 14th or 16th, like around USC. Let me quickly check because they're not on the graphic. Yes, USC is at 15th. Michigan was at plus 3,500. So you have 5 of the top 15 teams in odds to win it all from the Big Ten. That's 1/3. The SEC has Texas, Georgia, A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma. They have 7 of the top 15. But a lot of that is due to recruiting rankings, which is one of the best ways, while faulty, to measure teams in the preseason, because it's even harder to measure, what you think a team's EPA per play will be or what their efficiency will be than it is to just, look at star ratings, which do have a correlation and causation effect with NFL talent. But right now, here's how I would tab it. The top 3 programs with the top 3 staffs in the Big Ten are Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State. Michigan probably has a staff that's equivalent to a lot of those. I would also say USC has a chance at that. Iowa's staff is up there too. The top programs in, also Penn State's honorable mention for them. The top programs in the SEC are Texas and Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M, Ole Miss. I'd probably put LSU there. Those staffs, and I don't think we need a scientist or a doctor to tell you, the Big Ten staffs from those teams I mentioned outclass those SEC staffs significantly. If you line up number 1 in each conference, then number 2, 3, 4. The only ones that'd be close, I think, would be Indiana's at the top and Georgia's right there. There would be a lot of debate there, and I love what both of those staffs have done. So that's one reason I'm buying the Big Ten's future. Their staffing is just better than yours, and their money is just better than yours. And on top of that, it's also the structure of the conference. So I believe the Big Ten's the best conference right now. They have better coaching, they have better resources, and the coaching isn't just game management. It's development, it's program stability, it's the fact that they're more meritocratic in their hires, as Chris Drew has pointed out, and after that, Josh Pate, a lot of on-3 types have admitted to that. I've believed for, I'd probably say 2 years now, the Big Ten is better coaching. I wouldn't classify my 2022, 2023 self as good enough to properly assess the entire Power 4. But as I've grown and matured, post-maturation, I've almost unanimously said the Big Ten is better coaching and development, and the SEC just has more talent. On top of that, when you look at how the conferences are structured, I am a believer that while the Big Ten's the best, because their top is significantly better, as in their top 3, their top third is modestly better. I think this year you're going to see the top half as a whole will be better. So the middle of the Big Ten will be equivalent to the SEC. Everyone above middle in the Big Ten will be better. I think everyone below middle, the SEC, will be better. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. And what that means is the Big Ten has the better conference. They can claim that. They have better coaching. I think that's obvious. They have better money. That's even more obvious. They have done a better job evaluating in the portal. I mean, I would even argue that the Big 12 and some ACC teams have done a better job evaluating portal talent than the SEC, because the SEC was the most high school, top-end blue-chip recruiting-centric conference, and the portal is, pulling teams away from that, so the SEC is the conference that has to adjust the most. But due to the bottom of the Big Ten, still I think, and I know some people disagree with this, but I still think the bottom of the SEC is better. I did retweet a tweet the other day that implied that I didn't think that, and really I should have been more careful with my words. What I intended to mean is that, like, Mississippi State is better than Michigan State and Purdue, but they're not better than them by 21 points, for example. Like, oftentimes a lot of these types will say, Mississippi State or Kentucky would be middle of the road in the Big Ten. And that's not true. They'd be better than Purdue or Michigan State was last year, but they would still be bottom third. They just wouldn't be at the, they wouldn't be at the bottom of the chili pot, but they'd still be sinking in the chili pot. And this benefits the top Big Ten teams because on an average basis, this is a year where it's going to be different because Ohio State, Michigan, they have tough non-con opponents. They both play Indiana and Oregon. Michigan plays USC. USC plays Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State, same as Michigan. But at the same time, you're not going to see an SEC schedule as easy as Penn State's or as easy as Wisconsin's when looking at their conference slate. You're just not going to. And most years, that will benefit the top of the Big Ten by helping them, play in fewer competitive games, have slightly less injuries, and be able to rotate more guys when they want to and have fewer losses. So all of these things play into the Big Ten being the best conference. Some of how that conference is structured helps maximize those advantages. And the fact that, look, they're fans. It used to be SEC fans cared way more about college football than Big Ten fans did. That's not true anymore. That is not true anymore. Now, I would say Big Ten fans are starting to care as much as SEC fans should. You're seeing this amongst some other fan bases in college football due to NIL and everyone in theory having a better shot, because if you have the money, you have a shot as long as you have the coaching. And everything is just, my point is everything's aligning for the Big Ten in the future. Under the current rules, the Big Ten is only going to get better and better and better. The SEC, due to limited funds, will have a cap on most of their programs. The Big 12 will probably rebound and be as good as it was before Oklahoma and Texas left, because Texas wasn't quite up yet, and Oklahoma wasn't, playing at its potential that it did under Barry Switzer or parts of the Bob Stoops era. The ACC, I would also expect, outside of Miami, will be hurt by this. The current landscape of college football favors the Big 10 and Big 12 and schools that are west of the Mississippi and schools that are north of the Mason-Dixon line. And schools that are not in either of those categories get hurt by it. So that, along with the superior coaching and the fact that I think the Big 10 staffs, after this most recent hiring cycle, only got better on average, are why I'm buying stock in the Big Ten moving forward. The future of this conference is strong. They are going to win more natties in the next 10 years than probably all the other conferences combined, or at least they'll have a plurality share of the national titles. Nebraska and Matt Rhule's reporting card. This is a team that also improved their staff in the hiring cycle at defensive coordinator, on the defensive line with some of their defensive coaches. But this is also a, team and coach that really is under pressure. Let's be honest about that. They are under pressure because, well, the Big Ten's getting better. And Nebraska, as a blue blood and having a very tough schedule and having back-to-back seasons where they went bowling but only got 7 wins, means you got to break through at some point. Otherwise, you risk, being passed up by a lot of these other, big programs. Matt Rhule is entering year 4 as Nebraska's head coach. And Rhule, after going 5-7 in 2023, went 7-6 in back-to-back seasons. And that puts his overall record at, just doing quick math in my head here, 19-19. So he's 500 overall through 3 seasons. Losing record in Big Ten play. The team, is in a much better place right now than it was under Scott Frost. But what is his overall grade entering year 4? And how much pressure is he on? I'm going to make a separate video about how much pressure Matt Rhule is under entering 2026. But I'm curious about how my grade is going to impact the pressure I think he's on And I'm curious about what people are thinking about Nebraska externally and internally. So let's look at Nebraska's trend, just to provide some context for the first 3 seasons. You go from Scott Frost, who went 3-9 and 4-8 in 2022, and he got fired in the first 3 games of 2022. And you go to Matt Rhule, and there's an immediate improvement in wins. And then we have back-to-back seasons where Nebraska goes bowling. Back-to-back seasons with a regular season record of 6-6 or better for the first time since 2013 and 2014. For the first time in a decade. That's a pretty major achievement. And the FPI scores, the efficiency scores, are all better than his first year. The recruiting even improved until this past season where they were 93rd, and it wasn't because they got a bunch of crappy recruits. Their class was just extremely, extremely small, as it feels like they're trying to cycle for their 2027 class being a top 15 or top 10 class. And they were very young in 25 and also young outside of their starters in 2024. So I want to provide that context because I do think Rhule has done a better job than most people think. And while I do not love his game management, I'm not going to lie about that. I do not love the game planning, the game management. I love the culture that he's built and the foundation that he has set. I know that Dylan Raiola left for Oregon, but him even getting that commitment and having Raiola start for 2 years, that's a big achievement. Before him, you would have never seen a player of that caliber, a passer of that caliber, come to Nebraska. That was historic. And what people have to understand right now is Nebraska's a blue blood, historically. They are. But when you look at the modern landscape of college football and who they've been over the past 10 years, they are much more like their rival Iowa or Wisconsin or Minnesota than people care to admit. And you have to factor that in with what Rhule did. Like he basically took over Tom Allen's Indiana when he got there. Now, he hasn't done what Cignetti did, but Cignetti is the best staff and is the best coach in college football. He's an exception to the rule with what he's done, so we can factor that out. Who else, if they went to Nebraska, would have done a better job in the first 3 years? There are probably some names you can think of. There are definitely names that I would say would have, but how many? And it's a hypothetical. Like, we don't know for sure if they would have done better. I don't think Nebraska has top-end NIL money in the Big Ten. They do not have the same recruiting base that the West Coast schools do, or that a lot of the Midwest schools do, because they're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And they again, Kirk Ferentz and Iowa have been there for 20 years. They've set up their system. Fleck and Minnesota openly care more about winning bowl games than ever reaching the college football playoff. Like, he could go 8-5, 9-4, 7-6 for the rest of his tenure there, and he'd never get fired. Wisconsin is at least close to Illinois, close to Michigan, close to Ohio. Nebraska's in a very awkward and disadvantageous spot in the modern era of college football. Very much so. And the erosion of their former Big 12 pipelines under Scott Frost and Mike Riley has also contributed to some of these issues. I just like what I see. 19-19. Things haven't been perfect, but they did fix special teams last year. They found ways to win close games. The defense took a big step back, but I think a lot of that was personnel-wise. And while Rhule hasn't had a ton of staff continuity, I think a lot of that is because he made some questionable hires initially and then learned from those and improved at the coordinator positions over time. So now that we know that, let's go back to this trend and look at what we see. Factoring in Nebraska's state as a program and the fact that they have a long way to go before being able to even, touch their former blue blood status and translate that to wins and losses, he's improved from where Scott Frost is. He's a better coach than Frost. He's a better coach than Riley. I know that's a very low bar, but I don't know if Bo Pelini took over what Rhule did, would he be doing better than Rhule? I don't know that for sure. Recruiting still has momentum and juice with the Huskers. They were able to do a quietly good job in the portal. The schedule I know is tough, but we'll get to that later. And you have to adjust expectations for regular season performance relative to schedule. Like Ohio State, for example. If they expect consensusly that Ohio State must win 12 regular season games, even with their past success, that fan base is nuts, given the schedule. Now, they don't, thankfully. I've looked on Twitter and YouTube, and it seems like Ohio State fans are just have the expectation of get to the playoff, win some playoff games, show you're a national title caliber team. That's an appropriate expectation. With Nebraska's schedule, and we'll talk about it later, I think more of the same over the past few years is what the expectation should be, because more of the same with that schedule means Nebraska will be significantly improved from where they were last year. Last year, they had negative points per play, negative yards per play. They barely had a positive success rate margin, and a lot of that had to do with blowing out Akron and Houston Christian. They had a negative EPA per play margin. This was an average team. And without Rhule, it was a below average Power 4 team. If Rhule were healthy for the whole year, yeah, they probably go 8-4 in the regular season with the win over, USC. But the flaws that Penn State and the flaws that Iowa exposed had a lot more to do with the defense and offensive line than quarterback there. Rhule wasn't changing both of those games. I think, to hearken on the point I already have, and I've said it over and over again, we need to view Nebraska differently than how we have before. Improvement should be expected. It should. They have to get better this year. If Rhule does not get better this year, then he'll be on the hot seat entering 2027. And if they collapse due to the tough schedule, then you're probably looking at a different coach. Just knowing Nebraska's expectations, and they should still have them. I'm just saying, I've heard a lot of their fans say, we need to compete for titles. And you got to build slow to get there. Just winning 8, if Nebraska wins 8 games with this schedule, Matt Rhule should at least have someone saying Nebraska should compete for the Coach of the Year award with the schedule they have. I mean, look at this. Nebraska's win total opened up at 5.5, got bet up to 6.5. But that's with nothing in the non-con. They play, Ohio, Bowling Green, North Dakota, all at home. Michigan State on the road, they have a win total of 3.5. Maryland's win total ain't all that good. They get them at home. But after October 3rd against Maryland, where Nebraska, look, they have to start 5-0 there. Rhule has to start 5-0. They host Indiana October 10th. Play at Oregon October 17th. Off their October 24th bye, they host Washington. Their November slate is at Illinois, at Rutgers, Ohio State at home November 21st, at Iowa Friday, November 27th. They have one home game in the month of November. And Rhule in November has historically struggled, and Nebraska has never won back-to-back road games in the college football playoff era. So this schedule, given Nebraska's history, given the rosters, given the coaches, given the quality of team, just the odds of each team to win the Big Ten, reach the playoffs, or win it all added together, this is one of the toughest schedules in college football. It is. And I think the win total of 6.5 makes sense there. A great place to have a ton of momentum entering 2027 would be win all the games you should and win back-to-back road games, because Nebraska's roster is better than Illinois'. It is better than Rutgers. They should beat both of those teams. So, you know what? Win those 7 games, start out 5-0 and beat Illinois and Rutgers, and between one of Iowa and Washington, upset one of ththose teams. You're close enough to them in talent composite. You're close enough to them in terms of starting lineups to beat one of those teams. Go 8-4. At worst, go 7-5 and beat everyone you should beat, which has not been the case for Nebraska under the first 3 years of Matt Rhule. If I had to grade Rhule right now, not looking ahead for the grade, if he goes 8-4 this coming year, I will give him a high B, maybe even an A- grade through 4 years. If they go 8-4 this coming year, that's how tough the schedule is, and that is how bad of a situation I think that he inherited. And he would have had to have adjusted a lot from his prior methods at Temple and Baylor because of the new NIL and portal era to have that success at Nebraska. Like, that would be an amazing season to go 8-4 next year. Maybe even 7-5 if they play those top teams competitively and beat everyone they should beat. Right now, I would give Matt Rhule, I would say I'd give him a B-, a B- or a B right now. That's a higher grade than I think some would be willing to give him. But when I look at the recruiting, when I look at the improved development, when I look at the fact that he has targeted weaknesses and fixed them, I think that right now he's still building Nebraska up to be competitive. I just think given his methods and given the resources that Nebraska has, it's just been a more difficult ride than people have expected. And it's harder to stomach when you look at what Cignetti's done at Indiana. But you have to ignore that. Not saying that 5-7 or 6-6 is okay. It's not at Nebraska. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is looking at Iowa or Mark D'Antonio's Michigan State or 2021 Michigan State as a role model is probably much more realistic. Or like TCU under Dykes, or if Nebraska can get a donor, you're more so looking at like BYU, Texas Tech, Utah as a model for slowly building up, using the portal selectively and getting success than Indiana. Indiana's an exception to the rule. We have to accept that. It'll be easier for college football when we accept that. But I think right now Matt Rhule's done a good job, and him and Nebraska, I think they're a bit underrated entering 2026. Okay. Man, that was good. Good stuff. Good stuff. Someone gave him a C- grade. The Hammer 106. Nebraska should have never left the Big 12. Well, look, that's not Rhule's fault. That's not Troy Dannon's fault. That's not Dana Holgerson's or Rob Orich's fault. It's not Anthony Calandria's fault. It's not even the Big Ten's fault. That's the fault of Nebraska back in 2010 when they made that decision. And and they shouldn't go back to the Big 12. Yes, they would win more games there, but they wouldn't get nearly the same amount of money. Maybe they'd get more NIL money because the wins would inspire more donations, but they wouldn't get the same like revenue sharing. They wouldn't get the same, type of endowment. And with where we're going in the college football space, that's eventually going to determine whether or not you stay in the Power League and how much you can pay players, as schools can now pay them in limited ways. So, that's all I'm going to say with that. I would probably project Nebraska right now to go 6-6 or 7-5, which is right around that 6.5 win total. Michigan is another team I want to discuss, and I want to discuss whether or not they are undervalued entering 2026 here. It feels like nationally, Michigan is sitting at this appropriate spot of in between 10 and in between 20 right now. After spring, watching Michigan's spring game, reacting to, like seeing others react to Bryce Underwood's spring game performance, has some people shell-shocked, I think, by what they saw. Bryce Underwood didn't look too good in the spring game. Michigan's offense in general was beaten up by the defense in that game. And that has a lot of people now changing their tune about Michigan from being maybe optimistic to neutral or pessimistic. And I really love what Bud Elliott has said on the Cover 3 podcast about Michigan, where I don't know, this is paraphrasing his own words, not mine, I don't know if we can quantify the caliber of staff upgrade from Sharon Moore and his staff to Kyle Whittingham and his staff. And when you look at what the odds makers are saying, I think Michigan's preseason win total, their odds to win the Big Ten, and their odds to win the national title reflect that. Michigan is playing a far tougher schedule than they were last year. A schedule that is one of the toughest in college football. There is a world where it is going to be the toughest in college football this fall. There's a scenario where that pans out. And last year, they went 9-4, but it was an empty calorie 9-4. Their only good win was against Washington at home. Every other team they lost to, Oklahoma, USC, and Ohio State, were the only other good teams they played, including Texas in the bowl game. And that game against Washington was a matchup where Michigan should have won that thing by 30 points. And they barely were able to pull away. Just barely, because of so many mistakes they made. Just procedurally, having butterfingers, not capitalizing on some of Washington's mistakes early in the game. It was a travesty that game was tied in the third quarter. It really was. An absolute travesty. And keep in mind that Michigan, in many of these metrics I'm showing you, they were top 25 or top 30 or top 35. They were an above average Power 4 team. Sometimes they showed flashes of being a good or great Power 4 team with no coaching. Underwood never had a QB coach. Wink Martindale was, running the same thing, the same damn thing over and over and over again, never making adjustments. Him and Moore had a very contentious relationship that didn't help with game management. Chip Lindsey's offense was never really called as his offense. It was clearly Sharon Moore's. And many of the position coaches made lateral moves to other jobs, haven't been hired still, and just weren't that good last year. And Michigan's bringing in a staff from Utah that went 11-2, that produced a top 5 offense in most statistics last year, and it was top 10 in metrics. And they're bringing over a DC and Jay Hill, who did a really good job at BYU in his 3 years there, building it up from one of the worst defenses in the sport to a high-end defense in the sport. And I hear after the Underwood spring game performance, a lot of people saying, oh, well, he hasn't gotten any better than he was last year. Or, yeah, Michigan's probably a team who's just going to be pretty mediocre again. And look, I think that Michigan is at best going to go 10-2 this year. More likely than not, you're looking at 9-3 or 8-4. But you got to understand that with this schedule, that's a pretty good team. I've talked about it with some other teams. I talked about it on Twitter, actually, last night, about how Michigan probably will go 8-4 or 9-3, but with this schedule, that automatically makes Michigan a top 15 or top 10 team. I also discussed it with Texas and Ohio State, how I think they'll both be top 5, but they could lose 3 games as a top 5 team due to having the toughest schedules in college football. Kyle Whittingham right now is a top 10 coach. And just a few years ago, many people were talking about him as a top 5 coach. Then they went 5-7. People sold on him a bit. And then they went 11-2. And some people raised his rankings. Others did not. And he brought over the offensive coordinator from Utah and Jason Beck, who engineered perhaps the greatest offensive turnaround in the college football playoff era, going from an Iowa-esque offense to an offense that in a lot of ways was close to being as efficient as Indiana's was last year. Not quite that good, but with what they ran with their RPO stuff, integrating Dampier as a passer, being run heavy, it was pretty amazing what they were able to do. And he also brought over Jim Harding, the offensive line coach from Utah, who produced Spencer Fano as a first-round draft pick. Caleb Lomu was also selected, I believe, in the first round. I should know that off the top of my head. But yes, he was selected in the first round, 28th overall pick. So 2 tackles, first round from that O-line coach, coming to a much more talented Michigan team. And of course, we can't forget Jay Hill. The schedule is tough. The trends for Michigan, both historically and recently, indicate that, Michigan, while being a blue blood program, is not the same type of program that Ohio State is, or Alabama, or Georgia, etc. Not quite up there. But 57-12 since 2021, the fact that they had, quite literally someone even more corrupt and out of his mind than Mel Tucker as the head coach, and he went a combined 17-19, And they've recruited well, they retained their talent, they've used the portal. Michigan's going to reemerge here. I don't know if they'll do what they did from 21 to 23. I doubt it. That would take probably as good or even better coaching than those teams had, and those were some of the top coach teams in those respective seasons. So I wouldn't say no, Michigan's not going to win the Big Ten 3 years in a row, but they're not always going to be this 8 or 9 win team. And a lot of the people who say, well, that's what they were in the 21st century, that's what they have to be, well, those are often just instances of Michigan hiring poorly or getting, you could say their fans get unlucky that their administration hires poorly. It's like Ohio State, you couldn't put Larry Coker at Ohio State and he'd win 10 titles in a row. Programs are good, but they are often made up of decisions that make them into being the best. And I think the decision to hire Kyle Whittingham was a much better decision than retaining Sherrone Moore or promoting from within again, for example. I do think that Michigan, to a limited degree, because I still see a lot of people ranking them top 15, and that's where I think they are. I think Michigan is going to be somewhere in between the 9th best team and the 15th best team this year. So a lot of people do properly rate them. But I also think that within Big Ten conversations, there is some undervaluing of how massive of an upgrade this staff is. Like, no, Michigan won't be as good as Ohio State, Oregon, or Indiana this year, but just because they're not doesn't mean they won't be top 15 or maybe even top 10. I mean, you gotta remember the awfulness of Sherrone Moore. Are we gonna really defend Sherrone Moore's coaching just to say Michigan is only going to win 8 or 9 games for the rest of eternity? I think that's an intellectually dishonest argument. Now, in playing Western Michigan, Oklahoma, UTEP, Iowa, Minnesota, Penn State, Indiana, Rutgers, Michigan State, Oregon, UCLA, and Ohio State, with Ohio State, Oregon, Rutgers, Minnesota being on the road, yeah, your 8.5 is the appropriate win total. But 8-4 Michigan with this schedule is way better than 9-3 Michigan with last year's schedule. 9-3 Michigan, you're looking at a top 10 team. And I'm saying that because, look, if Ohio State or Texas, who have 9.5 win totals, if they only win 9 games this year with those schedules, those are probably top 5, certainly top 10 power-rated teams. Michigan has as tough or close to the caliber of schedules that those two teams have. They don't quite have the players that those two do, but man, the coordinators, the assistant coaches, the head coach, they have the goods there, and they're going to have a top 10 roster composite. So if they are able to squeeze the talent out of their roster that they have on paper and develop well, Michigan is going to compete for the college football playoffs this year. That's what Vegas is telling you with the 8.5 win total, and the fact that when you look at the odds to make the college football playoff, Michigan is not even 10 spots removed from teams that have minus odds to make the playoffs. They're projected to be one of the first teams out of the playoff picture, which technically they were last year because their schedule was easy, but in all reality they weren't. Michigan was like at best a top 25 team last year. This year Vegas is telling you, look, they're probably going to be a top 15 caliber team. So Michigan, they have it good. I don't know if their own fans or rival fans understand how big of an upgrade this was. If Michigan goes 9-3 this year, the fan base should be elated, because that means you either beat everyone you should beat and you only lost to the big 3, or you beat one of the big 3 and you probably lost to Iowa or Oklahoma or someone else who's like a good team and it was probably a close loss. Michigan is going to partially reemerge under Kyle Whittingham. They're going to perform better than they did under Sherrone Moore, and I just think you're being intellectually dishonest, or you're banking on a guy from the Pac-12 and WAC and Mountain West Conference area just not panning out east of the Mississippi, which I guess is possible, but there's no way that Whittingham and this staff aren't better than Moore and his staff, and that they don't get way more out of these players. No way. No way. No way in hell. There's not a chance at that. I skipped something with Michigan, didn't I? I did. What did I skip? Oh, just odds to win the Big Ten. That's not important. Michigan has plus 1,300 odds to win the Big Ten, but we already knew that. I already told you their odds to win the national title earlier. I told you their placement odds to make the playoffs. Look, Michigan just combining schedule is not going to win. They're probably not going to win the Big Ten. If they do, if with that schedule they win the Big Ten, they're top 5 in ratings, and there's a good shot they win it all. So that would be wild, for example. Another super chat here, this time from Going for Gold. Love that super chat. Let me take a look at it. The show is going longer than I wanted it to, but not too much longer. And a big part of that are these super chats, which I'll probably end up spending, say 10 minutes on. Going for Gold _8536. Excited for another year of CFB, Sam. It might not be my Skurs year this year, but it feels like this year is setting up to be a wild ride. Go Big Red. Go Big Red, Going for Gold. Thank you for being a longtime supporter of the channel. Thank you for sending in a super chat. I think Nebraska this year is going to be a tough out for some teams. I think this will be Rhule's best team at Nebraska, but yeah, I wouldn't expect them to compete for anything in the postseason due to the nature of that tough schedule. This season is going to be a wild ride because pretty much all the top contenders outside of Notre Dame at least have more than a challenge or two on their schedule. And maybe Texas Tech and Miami also don't have more than that too, but we knew that given they were Big 12 ACC or independent teams. I just as an interesting comment here from Michigander1212, partially reemerge. No, they will win a national title under Kyle Whittingham. I don't think so. I could be wrong. I do think they'll compete for a national title next year, though. The only reason I'm saying probably not is the odds are very slim. Like, I love Ryan Day in Ohio State, and I don't think Ohio State under Day, like, if you tell me Day is going to be here for another year, I'm not confidently picking them to win more than one natty. It's so hard to win a national title, especially in this modern era. So I wouldn't quite go that far, 1-2-1-2, but I think in 2027, if Michigan develops well this year, they play well this year, they're within their win total and are a top 15 power-rated team, they should bring almost everyone back in 2027, and at that point, you're probably going to get a national title contender, assuming all the parts mesh. And by all the parts, I don't mean giving them benefit of the doubt. I mean assuming the coaching staff upgrade is absolutely massive, they continue to recruit at a high level, they retain their players and have good NIL. And we've seen the proof of concept that Michigan, recruits inside the top 10, they have great NIL, and that this staff is good. So all of that just has to come together, and it likely will. And Michigan in 2027, along with USC, who we'll be talking about now, should be significantly better than they are this year. And I think that they will be competing for bigger and better things. I understand also what you're saying, Michigander. It's not everything is about odds. I'm not personally saying I think they will yet. I might be there after this season, but after being higher on Michigan than I should have been the previous 2 seasons, and with how tough this schedule is, I just want to see how year 1 pans out before making that move or decision. So, let's see. Okay, let's talk about some recruiting. Let's do that here. And man, USC and UCLA have been on fire, haven't they? Right now they have 2 of the top 4 recruiting classes in college football, and that's what we're going to talk about now. USC is competing for back-to-back number 1 recruiting classes, and I know there was this report released that USC is looking to have a smaller class this year, and I do believe that. But recruiting rankings are just, an educated guess and measurement of how classes are expected to pan out. If this 2027 recruiting class is high in quality and they're developed well, we could re-rank them in a few years and view them as, the number one recruiting class. And the same can be said about USC's 2026 class. The Trojans are at the top of the recruiting world right now, bringing in the caliber of athletes that you see going to Ohio State, that you see going to Georgia, that you see going to Texas. And I don't know what to say other than Riley needs to get this right. And I think with the current staff he has and with how they're recruiting, I think, look, he's destined to get it right at some point. USC is made for this modern NIL era, and I know that Riley has disappointed, but with how I look at it right now, yes, him and Clay Helton had a similar record. Similar with Jimbo Fisher, I forget his name. This is bad. This is Kevin Sumlin. This is an all-time gaffe. Similar to Kevin Sumlin. I understand that. Riley and Clay Helton have similar win-loss records, and it matches up with what Kevin Sumlin and Jimbo Fisher had. But Sumlin and Jimbo both started off hot, and then they tapered off. Riley started hot, much like Helton, had a bit of a valley, and now it feels like they're re-emerging and starting to try to reach a new peak. And it never really felt like Clay Helton did that. So I think, the wins and losses could be similar, and even maybe on an average basis when averaging out their years, recruiting could be similar. USC's reaching a peak in recruiting that they have not had in back-to-back classes since the Pete Carroll era. And last year they showed a caliber of physicality offensively that we haven't seen from a USC team since probably that era as well. I like USC to be a top 10 team this coming year. And with this 2027 recruiting class combined with the 2026 one, how can't you like USC to be a top 10 program moving forward? Mekhi Brown at edge, top 50 player, 6'6", 235 pounds. Honor Faleve Johnson, athlete, 5-star according to Rivals. Quentin Hale at wide receiver. Aaron Washington and Danny Lang at corner, who are both 4-stars in high school. They're not just recruiting, only quarterback, or only receiver, only finesse positions. They're recruiting the trenches well. They're recruiting corner well. USC is building a balanced roster to reload year over year over year moving forward and be a national title contender. You look at some of their next players after their top 5. So this is players 6 through 10. Drew Fielder, a 6'6", 270-pound offensive tackle. Alaifleti Tuihalamaka, I hope that's how you say his name. 6'3", interior offensive lineman, 265 pounds, or maybe that says D-line. Yes, that says defensive line. My apologies. Eli Woodard at wide receiver, Roy Oliver at wide receiver, and Javon Vital Jr. at running back. Those are their top 10 commits right now. And according to 24/7 Sports, they have the number 3 class. When you look at Rivals 2027 recruiting rankings, USC right now has the number 4 class, only behind Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and Texas A&M. And man, Texas A&M and Texas Tech have an insane average player ranking per recruit. And USC does too. USC is getting a lot of quality players this cycle. And looking at the overall national rankings for Rivals, you're talking about Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, USC, then you got Ohio State, you got Oregon, LSU, Florida, Georgia, Notre Dame, UCLA we'll talk about here. They're 11th. They're hot. You got Miami at 12th. It's incredible what NIL, the portal, and a good recruiting staff are able to do in the NIL and portal era. USC, probably unless they had a really good coach, with proven titles probably couldn't recruit at this level before this era. Like, you'd have to have like a top end like coach come in, and Riley can be that. He showed flashes of that, but he isn't quite that yet with his record and his resume at USC. But these recruits, they're buying in to what Riley and USC are doing. They're buying in to the future of the Trojan program, and I am too. I think I said it a year or a few years ago. I think that as long as Riley figures out defense, he'll eventually win it all at USC. And with Patterson as the defensive coordinator, and I expect that he could be there for a while with their recruiting, and the fact that they have the first year of Tremaine Carroll as the strength and conditioning coach of their program, they are already making noise. These younger recruits are, like Luke Wafel, Mark Bowman, in spring and summer camp. And you look at some other recruits who are on USC's board right now. When you look at USC's recruiting board for the rest of this class, yes, it probably will be smaller. But looking at some of their prospects, you still have top-end players that might be left for USC to get. I mean, Gavin Williams, a safety from California, Isaiah Bertola, a tackle from Hawaii, Isaiah Phelps, a linebacker from California, and there could be some other players that they are in play for. I also would expect, as the portal is now an integral part of recruiting, for their 2027 portal class to be pretty damn good if they don't already love what they have on the roster. Look at the 5-year program trend. A peak in 2022 record-wise, 23 the defense bottomed out, 24 the offense bottomed out. In 25, the defense replicated its 2024 success, and the offense improved back to its 23 or 22 levels, and they had their second best season under Riley yet, and they had the best overall high school recruiting class in the country. USC's program, their high school recruiting, it's on the rise, and I'm very optimistic about this program moving forward. They're not going to go away. They're going to make life harder for other top-end recruiting programs, and this team will be competing for national titles shortly. If not, they could be competing for one this fall. Now let's discuss UCLA. The Bruins have the number 4 recruiting class per 24/7 Sports and the number 11 class per Rivals. That's unheard of. We haven't seen a UCLA class that good since I think the mid or early 2010s. Chesney hasn't even coached a game on the field yet. And we're already seeing the dividends of them bringing over this entire JMU staff, transplanting that staff and much of that starting roster from JMU to UCLA. I also imagine that UCLA has gotten their donor class involved too. UCLA is among the top 10 universities in America, along with USC and Michigan, in terms of number of ultra-wealthy alumni, so multi-millionaire alumni. We're talking hundreds, tens of millions plus in net worth when you're talking about ultra-wealthy alumni. USC has the potential to field an elite donor class, and I imagine that Chesney has them engaged here. And that is key to revive this program from being at the bottom of the chili pot to being, that, fresh, warm cup of chili at the top. Sprinkle some cheese on it, put some crackers in it, maybe sour cream, and it's warm, it's filling. It's so good for your taste buds and for your body. It's a nice warm meal. And that's what it feels like when I'm, looking as an outside observer at UCLA right now. They're cooking something good over there. Their top 5 commitments: Juju Johnson, a corner, 5'10", 160. George Toai, hopefully I said his name properly. I do sometimes struggle with these names, especially since they're high schoolers. They haven't taken a snap in college yet. But 300 pounds, 6'2", defensive lineman. Jerry Outhouse, 6-foot corner, 4-star. Jackson Roper, a 6'4", 290 offensive lineman, I believe. It's incredible what they have done in recruiting here. UCLA has not been a good recruiting program recently. they have not been a they've not even been a good football team. They haven't fielded a good football team since 2023 or 2022, and even those teams were limited, and Chip Kelly never recruited like this. Other names that I don't have on this graphic, but Khalil Terry. Bless me. Khalil Terry is a 4-star safety from California. Paul Mola is a 4-star safety also from California. Colton McKibben, 4-star linebacker from New Mexico. They're bringing in highly touted players. And if they can keep these guys committed, and I imagine with how many of them committed in sequence of each other, that many of them are bought in. And this was a, calculated move, calculated decision to get a lot of momentum, publicity, to shore up this class right now, well before the summer, which is usually when classes' foundations get set. This is indicating something special in terms of momentum, in terms of recruiting. The on-field results have yet to come yet, but Chesney had success at Holy Cross and had success at James Madison. And I highly expect him to have success this year. If you do not expect UCLA to be a markedly better team this year than last year, you're not paying attention. To be among Miami, Notre Dame, Georgia, Florida, LSU, Oregon, Ohio State, USC, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and A&M in recruiting rankings, that's insane. And I know that their caliber of recruit isn't up there with a lot of these other programs. When you look at 24/7 Sports, their average rank per recruit is not even at Oklahoma's level, who has the number 1 class there. It's well behind USC, A&M, Ohio State's closer to about Penn State's level, and slightly behind Notre Dame's. It's still a good class, though. It's an elite class by UCLA standards. And again, this staff has done more with less in the past. Why aren't they going to do more with more? Why aren't they going to do more with less this year? Their recruiting came to nearly an all-time low in the past 5 years. Last season, which makes sense. They went 3-9. It was UCLA's worst football team in the past 5 years. They were so dreadful that they fired Deshaun Foster before Big Ten play. That is how bad UCLA was. That's how bad they were. And I understand they're not a traditional power. They have not been a power player for a minute here. But that staff's amazing. And they have some goods on the roster, too, from the G5 level. Do I think they'll be a college football playoff team this year? Probably not. They could get in, but if they do, they'll lose in the first round. But this team's going to be a hard out, and probably better than the majority of teams it plays on the schedule, given they got one of the more favorable Big Ten schedules. Los Angeles is dominating recruiting right now, and it's not just because of the Trojans, who signed the number 1 high school class last year and could sign that in terms of quality this year. Now UCLA's entered the fold. And what this NIL and portal era has done and how it's benefited teams not just north of the Mason-Dixon line, but also west of the Mississippi River is something that's got to be studied and is something that, should be expected. What's happening right now in Los Angeles with football, it's going to be pretty impressive what these two programs are within just a year or two of where we are right now. Last but not least, speaking of UCLA and USC, we got to talk about some bold predictions here. This is another theme on the channel. It's not going to be scripted or scheduled like the buying selling is. That'll be Friday and Mondays, probably for the rest of the preseason, even maybe for parts of the regular season, even. And the breakout players, that's going to be kind of an everyday thing for like the next 2, maybe even 3 weeks. This is just whenever I feel like it. I'll talk about 1, maybe at the most 2 bold predictions from users on this show. A lot of what Josh Pate does. So, Logan Sweet, 4190. Let me say that again just to make it more clear, especially in case if he's in the chat. He's been a longtime viewer of the show. Logan Sweet, 4190. Big fan of the channel, also happens to be an Oregon fan. He asked in a post I made asking for bold predictions from my viewers. That's the wrong way of phrasing it. My apologies. Logan Sweet 4190 said in a reply to one of my bold predictions posts that he believes Oregon will win the national title. He's a big fan of the show. He's also an Oregon fan, and according to him, in his own words, he's sipping the Kool-Aid. Oregon will win it all, and simultaneously, USC will miss the college football playoff. Isn't it awesome, the new NIL and portal era? I know that it has destroyed some rivalries, but it has created new ones. Like Oregon and USC, that's a big-time rivalry now. That is. These two teams, they hate each other. And I think USC has tried to use this newfound rivalry with Oregon in their social media as a way to get the fan base more engaged and as a way to get the team more honed in and engaged. And while I think some of it's incredibly stupid, like don't poke the bear, Oregon has the most talented roster in college football right now with the top 5 staff, it also might be smart. It might be a way to rally support. And look, even if Oregon continues to own USC as they have recently, that doesn't mean this can't be used for good by USC to maybe beat some other teams and to motivate themselves to be in that playoff picture, to be in the national title picture. When you look at odds to win the national title, because I want to rate this on a boldness scale, I do, or at least review it. Don't want to exactly copy what Pate does, but what he does with bold predictions is a pretty cool system. Oregon winning it all, that's not bold at all. I know according to odds, they're tied with Indiana. They're behind Texas, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. I will tell you guys right now, just based on schedule, coaching, roster, the top 3 teams in terms of odds to win the title should be Notre Dame, because they're a lock to get there with that schedule, Oregon, because they, along with Notre Dame, are a lock to make the playoffs. Not as much of a lock, but close enough. And they have the best roster in the sport. And then after that, it should be Indiana and Georgia. Those 4 should be the favorites because the schedule, coaching, and for the most part roster, they all align with each other really well. Ohio State and Texas have better rosters, I would say, in terms of talent and depth on average than Georgia or Indiana do. But they may not have the depth of Georgia. They may not have the cohesion and starting excellence of Indiana. And their schedules are much harder. Like way, way, way harder. I also think Indiana and Georgia are better coached than those two teams. So while power ratings wise, yeah, if those teams get to the playoffs, they should expect to win it all. Schedules make it tough. And it's the same thing with like LSU or A&M or Texas Tech. I would have said is very underrated in odds, but I don't know if they can win it all with how much they need to reload and the quarterback situation. USC's at plus 3,500 to win it all, so that means they're not among the top 12 teams in odds, and that means that they would actually be favored to miss rather than make the playoff right now. So I don't think, just to start off and look at this, I don't think this prediction's very bold. I don't. It's bold because it's parlayed, but is it so bold that I would say, like, let you give me 3 content video suggestions to make as a reward for getting that right? No. And as an Oregon fan, Logan, you should be excited that you're one of the few teams that's privileged to have a 10.5 win total. The other, so we have Oregon, we have Indiana, we have Texas Tech, we have Miami, we have Notre Dame. Those are the only 5 teams to have a win total of 10.5. Oregon's juiced under, and that's because they play at Ohio State, where Ohio State would be favored right now. They also play at USC, they play Michigan, they play Washington, and then at Oklahoma State's tricky enough to juice them at, favoring 10-2. Indiana's slightly juiced over. Texas Tech, I think, is slightly juiced over. Miami, I think, is juiced under, and then Notre Dame's juiced. Notre Dame has the 11.5 win total. They're the only team with that. They're juiced under. So that already makes this likely, looking at the schedule. Notre Dame will be favored over everyone on their schedule, mostly by double digits. Oregon will be the same, with the exception of Ohio State. Right now, odds makers would favor Ohio State in that game. I personally would probably favor Oregon slightly, much like how Ohio State was slightly favored over Oregon back in 2024 when they traveled there. That's a very tricky game to travel to Columbus in a game where Ohio State will probably play that post-noon, as I can't imagine big noon kickoff will force Oregon to kick off at like 9 a.m. local time in a big game like that. I can't imagine that. And then there's enough tricky spots at Oklahoma State, at USC, hosting Michigan, Washington at home, to where they might drop a game or even two. But this team's likely a lock to make the playoffs. And they were so good last year. Anyone telling you that Oregon was overrated last year has lost their mind. There were 4 teams entering last year that were viewed as the, top 4 in terms of combining talent with coaching. Not saying they were right or wrong. Oregon, Texas, Georgia, and Ohio State were like among the odds makers, among the analysts. Those were viewed as the most talented rosters with great coaches. The question about them was they all had very minimal experience. And then Penn State and Clemson weren't as talented, but they were viewed as having a ton of experience, and they were close enough in talent to be put in that conversation. Same with Alabama. Even though they had equivalent talent, they weren't treated as if they were with those 4. The point being, Oregon actually reloaded the best out of all of them. Ohio State of those 4 was the best team, but they were way better than Oregon the year prior and lost as much. Oregon was the only team out of that group of 4 that got better from 24 to 25. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear that, oh, well, they're definitely worse than Texas. Like, no, they were top 5. Texas wasn't even top 10. I don't want to hear that Notre Dame's definitely better than them, which it seems like the consensus in polls is that Oregon is definitely worse than Texas and Notre Dame right now. I don't want to hear it. You're rewarding those teams for not making the playoffs, where they probably would have gotten handily beaten by an Indiana or an Ohio State, or maybe even by a Georgia or a Miami. I don't want to hear it. I don't. And they return a plethora of their production, of their roster. They probably upgraded at DC, knowing what we know about Tosh Lupoy. And they in early mock drafts have anywhere from 4 to 5 first-round picks. It's insane. Their roster is truly top-end and top-notch. And look at their efficiency metrics last year on offense and defense. With how good they were. They were top 10 on both sides of the football. They were a really good team in terms of generating explosive plays. They had NFL QB play. This was Oregon's best secondary since Christian Gonzalez or before that. And Brandon Finney in his sophomore year is going to be an All-American. And on special teams, they blocked kicks. They did a better job making field goals in clutch moments than they did the year before. And I thought last year was a litmus test for Oregon. Same with 2024. In 2024, you enter the Big Ten, you play Ohio State and Michigan. What do you do since in recent memory they've been better than you? And you beat both of them in the regular season, won the Big Ten. I know Ohio State blew them out in the Rose Bowl, but Ohio State was just the better team with better players and a better, more experienced coach and staff. It happens. They overachieved that year. Last year, their win total got set at 9.5 at the end of the year. You had enough people betting on them to regress that their win total dropped to 9.5. And they lost to Indiana by 10, but Indiana won it all. And I know later they got blown out in the rematch, and that stung a lot of people, analysts and Oregon fans. But they controlled Texas Tech. They beat Iowa. They beat USC. They beat Washington. They beat Penn State. All of those teams finished top 20 or top 15 or better in advanced metrics. They were like 5-2 against top 15 caliber teams or top 20 caliber teams. Texas Tech being top 10, USC certainly being top 15. Penn State, even after their collapse, was that. And in that game against Oregon specifically, they were probably top 10. Washington was top 20 at the end of the year. And Iowa was probably top 15 at the end of the year. So the criticism levied towards this staff in big games, I get it. But this very much feels like the year where coach that won some big games, but they were all discredited, all of a sudden wins the big games you can't discredit and then wins it all. Like Ryan Day did in 24, Kirby Smart did in 21, Jim Harbaugh did in 23. Cignetti never really had a long enough of a track record to be given that moniker. But, at one point, there were people probably talking about Nick Saban that way, or people talking about Dabo Swinney in that way. And now, I think this is the moment, this year, or if not this year, sometime in the next 5, I think Oregon's definitely going to win it all in the next 5 years. With how they recruit, with how they develop, with how ridiculously good their, position coaches are. I love Oregon this year, and I love them moving forward. It is the same with USC, but we have to keep in mind their win total this year is at 8.5, so they're favored to miss the playoffs. And they play Oregon at home, yes, but Oregon will be favored in that game. They also play Ohio State at home and Indiana on the road. So they play the big three. They'll be underdogs in probably all of those games. At Penn State is going to be tricky. Washington at home in between the Penn State and Oregon games is going to be tricky. At Wisconsin in a classic look-ahead spot before Ohio State, man, that's tricky. I know it's off a bye, but, traveling across the country, then going back for the bye, traveling across the country again, that's tricky too. And then traveling at Indiana in November, the schedule's tough. I mean, if USC guys, if they win 9 or 10 games, then Riley has the goods and he's going to win it all at some point with this schedule. They're just not quite there yet, depth or roster-wise. Not quite there yet. But they're close. And if they somehow make the playoffs this year and Logan's bold prediction is busted, then, hey, we have a winner in the future. And you could probably parlay Oregon and USC in the next 5 years to win a title, if you know that's going to happen. But USC last year, they were a playoff contender, but they were not a national title contender. They just weren't good enough on defense. They weren't good enough with turnovers. They weren't consistent enough on the road to be that top-end team. A top-end team, the way USC played offensively against Notre Dame or Oregon, makes those fourth quarter games or even beats one of those teams on the road. Because those teams, look, they were top 5 at the end of the year, but they weren't quite Ohio State good, and they were not Oregon good in efficiency or in how good their starting lineups were and how balanced they were. They didn't have the staffs those two did either. USC is just not there yet, and you see that in the metrics from last year, and they should take a step forward this year, which is terrifying. 13th in FPI, 16th in S&P Plus, and 13th in FEI, and if they take a step forward, you're probably looking at a top 10 team, and they should take a step forward. But the reason I don't think it's that bold by Logan to predict this here is USC's special teams were fairly dreadful. Their defense was mediocre. Their offense was really good, but on the road, especially that rushing attack, got shut down really quickly. So I still think they have probably another year before they are, say, a top 5 team. And I think with that schedule, to be favored to make the playoffs with that schedule, you got to be closer to a top 5 team than a fringe top 10 team. And right now, I would tab USC to be more of that fringe top 10 team than top 5 team. They could bust that, though. They have the coach. They have the defensive coordinator, I think. They have the personnel. And they have the schedule where it's very tough, but Oregon and Ohio State are at home. And I don't know. It's a big year for USC. It's an even bigger year for Oregon here. It's an interesting parlay. On the boldness scale, just because it's hard to win a national title, and USC is one of those teams that's just on the outside looking in for the playoffs, I would probably give this a 7.5 on the boldness scale. The parlay makes it higher than a 7, but it's not an 8 or a 9 because Oregon's one of the teams favored to win it all. I think they're a bit underrated in odds, and I think the odds makers are intentionally giving you, extra juice to bet Oregon because I think a lot of top-end bettors and a lot of the public is not touching them. They're overreacting to the college football playoff results over the past 2 years. With USC, I also think they're underrated in those areas too, but it's going to be so hard for them to make the playoffs. So, good bold prediction, Logan. I'm excited to see how this one pans out. I would give it a 7.5 on the boldness scale. And that is all she wrote. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for watching. We had a really good day today. Really good day. We're going to be live tomorrow at noon as well. And maybe a little bit earlier, actually, now that I remember some plans that I have. It might be a little bit earlier than that. But we will be live tomorrow. So be there tomorrow. Same with Thursday, same with Friday now that I'm off school. Have a great day, everyone. And if you want to support me, check out my Patreon page via the link in the description. Or I think it is just patreon.com/CFBWSam. Yes, patreon.com/CFBWSam. You can sign up as a paid member there, and I will get a larger cut of your monthly subscription there than I do from YouTube memberships or a YouTube super chat. So that's a way to support the show. Same with commenting, same with liking, same with watching, all these things that you guys did today. More of that, more of this. We're going to be providing you daily college football content. We'll see you all very soon. Have a great day. See ya.